The call I made at 2 a.m. from a federal holding room at O'Hare said everything about my life that I had been pretending wasn't true. I had been sitting in a gray plastic chair for 6 hours by that point, the kind that digs into your lower back no matter how you angle yourself. The overhead lights were fluorescent and merciless. My carry-on was in a separate room, being searched for the second time. My laptop, which was my second brain and possibly my first love, was sealed inside a plastic evidence bag with a yellow tag that had my name on it. Except, according to the CBP officer who had pulled me out of the customs line at 8:47 p.m., my name was the problem. Someone had used my social security number to open 3 shell accounts and move $4.2 million through a correspondent bank in the Caymans over the last 6 weeks. The accounts had been opened under my name. The activity had triggered a FinCEN alert, and when I landed at O'Hare on the overnight flight from the Financial Analysis Conference in Boston, the system caught me. I wasn't scared. That was the strange part. I was mostly annoyed, and underneath the annoyance was a cold, sharp understanding of exactly how this had happened and why. But I couldn't tell the CBP officers that, because doing so would have blown 4 weeks of quiet, careful work. So I sat. I answered their questions with the same flat, measured patience I used in quarterly earnings reviews. I asked for water. I got water in a paper cup. I drank it. At 2 a.m., they told me I could make a call. I called Everett Drake. I could have called the company's federal attorney. I had 3 lawyers in my contacts whose entire job was exactly this kind of situation. I called my boss. I called the man whose financial architecture I had spent 4 years quietly, meticulously learning. And quietly, meticulously protecting. Because I was the only person in the world who understood what was actually happening. And he was the only person who needed to know. He answered on the second ring. Drake. His voice was exactly the same at 2 a.m. as it was at 9 a.m., low, controlled, stripped of anything decorative. Mr. Drake, I said, it's Ainsley Reed. I'm sorry to call at this hour. A pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. In 4 years, I had learned to read Everett Drake's pauses, the way other people read facial expressions. This one was the pause of a man recalibrating. Where are you? O'Hare, Federal Holding. I've been here since 8:47. Another pause, shorter. What happened? It wasn't a question. It was an invitation to report. Someone used my identity to move money. $4.2 million. FinCEN flagged my name when I landed. I kept my voice level. My laptop has been confiscated. They're treating me as a person of interest. Silence on his end, the kind that had weight. Don't say anything else to them, he said. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He hung up. I should have told him not to come himself. There were people whose entire job was handling exactly this. Everett Drake was worth somewhere north of $300 million and ran a private equity firm operating on 4 continents. He did not personally retrieve detained employees from airport holding rooms in the middle of the night. He was there in 37 minutes. I knew he'd arrived before anyone told me, because the energy in the room changed. The officer who had been ignoring me suddenly straightened in his chair. I heard voices at the desk outside, one of them low and unimpressible, and then the door to the holding room opened, and Everett Drake walked in. He was wearing a dark charcoal pullover and dark trousers, no tie, no jacket. His hair was unstyled. I had never seen him anything less than completely put together. This version of him, the 2 a.m. version, made him look more dangerous, not less. He looked at me. His eyes did a fast, thorough inventory. My face, my wrist where the sleeve of my blazer had ridden up to show the bruise left by a CBP officer who'd grabbed me when I reached for my documentation, the dark circles that 6 hours of fluorescent lighting had done nothing to help. Then his eyes went flat and still, and he turned to the officer behind him. Who authorized physical contact with my employee, he said. The next 20 minutes were a demonstration in the kind of authority that doesn't need to raise its voice. Everett didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He spoke to 3 different CBP officials in the same low, even register, and by the end of it, my laptop was back in my bag. The federal hold on my travel was suspended pending further review, and I was walking out of the building beside him. His car was at the curb, black SUV, engine running, His driver, a quiet, solid man named Hank, who I had seen exactly twice in 4 years, didn't look back when we got in. I sat as far over on the seat as the door allowed. I was aware that I had been awake for over 30 hours and had spent 6 of them in a gray room under bad lighting, and that I probably looked exactly like that. I stared out the window at the expressway. At 2 a.m., Chicago was all orange highway lights and empty lanes. "You're favoring your left wrist," Everett said. I pulled my sleeve down. "I'm fine." "You're not." He reached across the seat and held out his hand, palm up, waiting. The gesture was so direct that I didn't know how to deflect it. I laid my wrist in his hand. He pushed my sleeve up. The bruise was ugly, a deep purpling band across the inside of my wrist, where an officer had turned me around. I'd been too busy being processed and questioned to actually look at it. Under the passing highway lights, it looked worse than I'd realized. Everett looked at it for a long moment. His thumb moved very slightly, just below the bruise where the skin was still clean. He didn't press on it. "Did you ask for medical attention?" I asked for water and got a paper cup. He set my wrist gently back in my lap. Then he picked up a dark wool jacket from the seat between us and laid it across my shoulders without saying anything. I didn't argue. I was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. "Talk to me," he said. "Not the official version, the real one." I turned to look at him. In the dark of the car, with the city moving past outside, he looked stripped of the CEO armor. "Boyd Salter," I said. He went very still. "I've been running a parallel audit on the Meridian subsidiaries for 4 weeks," I said. "The ones that were supposed to be restructured after the Bellwether acquisition. They weren't restructured. They were reactivated under different routing architecture. Someone has been using them to move money through a correspondent bank in the Caymans. Boyd Salter's personal financial management firm is the beneficiary entity on 2 of the 3 accounts." I paused. He figured out I was looking, so he opened a 4th account using my credentials and triggered the FinCEN alert himself. If I get flagged as a federal money laundering suspect, anything I've compiled is tainted. I lose my credibility before I can go to the SEC. Everett's expression didn't change, but his right hand, resting on his knee, closed slowly into a fist. Boyd Salter was a board member. 11 years on Drake Capital's board. He'd brought in 3 major institutional investors. He played golf with senators. "How much?" Everett said quietly. "Across all 3 active accounts? Closer to 19 million. Over 14 months. The silence in the car had edges. "You've had this for 4 weeks, Everett said. "You were going to bring it to me when?" "When I had all of it." I looked at the passing lights. Partial evidence in a case like this gives the target time to maneuver. I needed to be complete. He let out a slow, controlled breath through his nose. "And you have the documentation?" "I have everything. Routing records, timestamps, the shell company registrations, the beneficial ownership disclosures he filed with the wrong jurisdiction, the corresponding withdrawals from the Meridian accounts." I built a cross-referenced ledger. I looked at him. It's backed up to an encrypted cloud partition that isn't connected to any company server. Boyd can't touch it. Everett turned his head to look at me. The car went under an overpass, and for a moment we were in complete shadow. And then we came out into orange light again, and he was still looking at me. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that you have been quietly dismantling a $19 million embezzlement operation on your lunch breaks." "I eat at my desk," I said, "so technically on my lunch break and several evenings." He made a sound in the back of his throat. I couldn't identify it. It wasn't quite a laugh. "Hank," he said toward the front of the car, "we're not going to Lincoln Park. Take us to the building." Hank adjusted course without a word. Everett's apartment occupied the top floor of a residential tower in Streeterville, 11 blocks from the Drake Capital offices. I had been to the offices 6,000 times. I had never been here. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, and the first thing I noticed was that the windows were floor-to-ceiling on 3 sides, and the city was laid out below us, like a circuit board still alive at 3 a.m. The second thing I noticed was how quiet it was. "Sit," Everett said, nodding toward a low gray sofa facing the windows. I sat. My body, which had been running on adrenaline and fluorescent light for 6 hours, abruptly remembered that I'd been awake since 4:30 the previous morning. He brought me a glass of water, real water, not a paper cup, and then a short glass of something amber. Bourbon, I found out when I drank it. Good bourbon. The kind that goes down like a decision. "When is Boyd making his next move?" Everett said. He had settled into an armchair across from me, forearms on his knees, looking at me with the same focus he gave earnings calls. "Soon. He knows the Finson flag only buys him 24 to 48 hours before I'm cleared. My financials are clean. The hold won't survive a formal review." I set the glass down. "When it lifts and I'm back in the building, he'll assume I'll go straight to you. He'll try to move the money before I can file anything." "Move it where?" "Out of the correspondent bank. If he can get it into a private trust structure in a non-reporting jurisdiction, it becomes exponentially harder to trace. He needs about a 6-hour window to complete the transfer architecture." "Can he do it before morning?" "If he started an hour ago, yes. I looked at the city. He probably started an hour ago." Everett stood up. "I'll call legal." "Don't," I said it quietly. He stopped. "If we go through the company's legal team, Boyd finds out within the hour. He's been on the board for 11 years. He knows everyone." I met his eyes. "I need my laptop." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he walked to the console table near the elevator, picked up my bag. Hank had brought it up from the car and carried it over without a word. I opened the laptop. The encrypted partition loaded in 30 seconds. 412 files, organized by date, account, and transaction type. It was, if I do say so, a beautiful piece of work. Everett leaned against the edge of the sofa behind me, looking over my shoulder at the screen. He didn't speak. He watched me work. I didn't go to the company's legal team. I went to the SEC's online whistleblower portal. "That's an anonymous filing," Everett said. "Officially anonymous. The SEC will correlate the documentation I'm providing with my access credentials and know exactly who filed it." I typed steadily with my right hand, favoring my left wrist on instinct. "But because it's a formal whistleblower submission under Dodd-Frank Section 21F, the moment I hit submit, Boyd's accounts are flagged for an automatic regulatory hold pending review. It doesn't matter if he tries to move the money in the next 6 hours. The correspondent bank's compliance system will block the transfer. You're filing a federal whistleblower complaint at 3:30 in the morning. Boyd filed a federal money laundering flag against me at 8:47 p.m. I'm working on a slight delay." I hit submit. The confirmation screen appeared. Reference number, timestamp, acknowledgement of receipt. The SEC's automated system noted that the filing contained documentation sufficient to trigger a preliminary asset review. I closed the laptop. "When will the freeze activate?" Everett asked. "It's probably already active. The system is automated." I leaned back into the sofa cushions. The bourbon was warm in my chest. "Boyd is going to find out in the next couple of hours when his transfers start bouncing. He won't know it was a whistleblower filing initially. He'll think it was your legal team. He'll try to get out in front of it." I looked at Everett. "Let him. The more he talks before he lawyers up, the more he says on record." Everett looked at me the way I imagined. People looked at something they had badly, catastrophically underestimated, and were only now beginning to grasp the full scale of it. "You've been sitting outside my glass office for 4 years, he said. "I've been sitting inside your financial infrastructure for 4 years, I corrected. "The desk is just where I kept my coffee." Something crossed his face. Not a smile exactly. The expression of a man who had just discovered an entirely different room in a house he believed he knew completely. He reached out and very carefully took my left hand, turning it over to look at the bruise again in the better light. His grip was nothing like the CBP officers. It was deliberate and precise, like he was cataloging damage and noting who was responsible for each item. "Does it hurt?" he asked. He already knew the answer. "I've had worse paper cuts." "Ainsley." My first name in his voice, without the Ms. in front of it, landed differently than I expected. Like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known was there. "Yes," I said, "it hurts." He held my hand for another moment. Then he stood, walked to the kitchen, came back with an ice pack wrapped in a clean cloth. He sat on the coffee table across from me, Not in the armchair, closer than that, and pressed it gently against my wrist. "You should have told me 4 weeks ago," he said. "You would have moved on Boyd before I had everything I needed. He would have buried it." "You don't know that. You're not patient when people steal from you." I watched his face. "I've seen you in due diligence meetings, Mr. Drake. You're surgical when the numbers are right. When someone's stealing from you, you're not surgical." He held my gaze. "You're right," he said, and the admission sounded like it cost him something. I didn't say anything. Outside, Chicago glittered in the dark. He didn't let go of the ice pack on my wrist. He didn't move back to the armchair. We stayed like that, the city shifting below us, until I fell asleep sitting up on his sofa. I woke to coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt plastic variety from the Federal Holding Room. I could smell it before I was fully awake, and for 4 disorienting seconds I had no idea where I was. Then I registered the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline, going pale gray in early morning, the dull ache in my wrist, and I remembered everything at once. I was still on the sofa. Someone had laid a blanket over me at some point. The ice pack was gone. Everett was in the kitchen. Dark jeans, a slate-colored Henley, sleeves pushed to the elbows. He was pouring coffee into 2 mugs with the focused efficiency of a man who approached everything, including coffee, as a logistical problem to be solved correctly. I stood up, pushing the blanket aside, and walked toward the kitchen on autopilot. He looked up when he heard me. "You moved," he said. "You were going to bring it to the sofa." I was. I don't like being brought things. I reached past him and took one of the mugs. "Sorry." The corner of his mouth moved. "No, you're not." He was right. I wasn't. I drank the coffee and watched the morning come up over the lake while he told me what had happened while I slept. At 4:15 a.m., Boyd Salter had attempted 3 outgoing wire transfers from the Cayman correspondent account. All 3 had been blocked by the compliance freeze. At 5:30 a.m., Boyd had called the board's general counsel. At 6 a.m., the SEC's preliminary review team had sent a preservation notice to Drake Capital's registered agent. The legal department had called Everett at 6:15. "Boyd doesn't know about the whistleblower filing yet," Everett said. "He thinks I found it through internal audit." "Good. Let him think that." I wrapped both hands around the mug. My left wrist was stiff but functional. "He's going to try to reframe it. He'll say the Meridian accounts were an authorized off-book structure. He'll say you knew." Everett's expression went flat. "He'll say I knew. He'll say you approved it verbally. No documentation, your word against his." I looked at him over the rim of my mug, which is why I made sure the whistleblower filing timestamps me as the source, and I logged every access I made to those accounts with a separate private notation file that proves I was auditing them without authorization from you or anyone else. If Boyd tries to implicate you, the SEC's own documentation will show that the person who found it and reported it was not acting at your direction. Everett set down his coffee. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I had to look up. "You protected me," he said. "While you were building the entire case, you built in protection for me. You pay me to protect the financial integrity of the firm. That is not what I pay you to do. It's what I do anyway." He reached up and did something completely unexpected. He pushed a strand of hair back from my face, very gently, his fingers brushing my temple. I had not slept well, and probably looked like an audit that had gone sideways, and he touched my face like I was something he was only now seeing for the first time, with any clarity. "What do I call you?" he said. His voice had dropped. "In my head I've been calling you something else for about 3 years. My heart did something inconvenient. "What?" "Ace," he said it simply. "You walk into a room full of numbers that don't add up, and in 20 minutes you've found the one thing everyone else missed. You've always been the ace I didn't know I had." I didn't have an answer for that. I stood there holding my coffee mug, wrist bruised, 32 hours without sleep, looking at Everett Drake, who was watching me with an expression I had never seen him use on a balance sheet. "The board meeting is at 10, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I know, he didn't move. Tell me how to handle Boyd." He was asking, not testing, not managing me, genuinely asking. The most controlled man I had ever worked for was standing in his kitchen at 7 a.m., asking his senior financial analyst for strategic counsel, and the asking was entirely unguarded. "Don't go in swinging," I said. "Boyd will be in defensive mode, and he'll try to bait you into making accusations you can't prove in real time, because he thinks all you have is the account activity." I thought through the room. Offer him an exit. Present the SEC filing as something that happened independently, which it did, and tell the board you are conducting a full review. Give Boyd the opportunity to resign voluntarily for personal reasons before the preservation notice becomes public record. And if he doesn't take it, he will. Boyd is many things, but he's not stupid enough to sit inside a federal investigation when he has a clean out. I held his gaze. He'll take it. He'll be furious and he'll lawyer up immediately and spend the next 2 years negotiating his way out of the federal side of this, but he'll leave the board today. Everett studied me. The kitchen was warm and quiet, and the lake outside the window was going from gray to silver. "After this is over," he said, "you are not going back to that desk." "I have a system on that desk. I'll have your system moved." He picked up his coffee again. "You're taking the office on the north side of mine. The one with the actual window. That's Alden Whitfield's office. Alden is relocating to the Denver satellite in 6 weeks. He doesn't know yet." His eyes met mine over the rim of his mug. "You'll have the office by Friday, and you're going to need a direct line to the CFO, sign-off authority on all subsidiary audits, and a new title, because what you've been doing for 4 years doesn't fit the one on your current badge." My throat felt unexpectedly tight. What title? "We'll figure it out," he said, with the certainty of a man for whom this was the least complicated item on the agenda. He was right about Boyd. The board meeting lasted 45 minutes. I was not in the room. I was in a conference room down the hall, working through the preservation notice documentation on my laptop, my left hand propped on the armrest because Everett had told me to keep it elevated. At 10:47 a.m., my phone lit up with 2 words from him. "He's gone." I sat in the conference room and let out a breath I had been holding since 8:47 p.m. the night before. At 11:15, the door opened and Everett walked in. He still looked composed in the way I now understood, meant he'd been managing a room full of alarmed board members. He looked at me, I looked at him. "You were right," he said, word for word. "I usually am." I closed my laptop. "How are the others taking it?" Shock, anger, questions about how long it had been going on. He sat down across from me. I told them a member of my team identified the irregularities and brought them to regulatory attention through appropriate channels. "I didn't name you." "You should have." "I will, when you're ready for that conversation and not before." He leaned back, watching me with the same fixed, unhurried attention he'd had at 3 a.m. in the car. "The SEC liaison is going to want to speak with you next week." "I know, I've already drafted a preliminary response document." He shook his head, very slightly, and there it was, the expression I'd first seen in the kitchen that morning, the one that had nothing to do with balance sheets or boardrooms. "Ace," he said. I looked at him. "You've been the most important person in this building for 4 years," he said. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it out loud. The conference room was very quiet. 11 floors below us, Chicago was going about its Tuesday with no idea that $19 million in stolen funds had just been frozen by a federal regulator on the basis of 412 documents compiled by a woman who ate lunch at her desk. I thought about what I would have said to the version of myself sitting in that gray plastic chair 6 hours ago. I thought about the ice pack, the blanket, the way he'd said my name without the Ms. in front of it. "You could have promoted me 2 years ago," I said, "just for future reference." His mouth curved, a real one, noted. The north office had a window that looked directly out over the river. My system, all of it, the color-coded file architecture, the secondary monitor, the specific brand of mechanical keyboard that everyone else in the building found aggressively loud, was moved in by Thursday afternoon. On Friday morning, I walked past my old desk, without looking at it, pushed open the door to the north office, and sat down in the new chair, which had excellent lumbar support. because Everett had apparently consulted someone about this specific detail and refused to acknowledge it when I mentioned it. I opened the subsidiary audit files the CFO had forwarded with a subject line that read, "Per Everett's instruction, please review and advise." Down the hall, through the glass wall of his office, I could see Everett on a call. He was facing the window, his back to the room, but when I sat down, he turned his head, as though he'd heard the chair move from 40 feet away. He looked at me for a moment, then he went back to his call. I opened the first file. Some people spend years looking for the room where they belong. I had apparently been 3 doors down from mine the entire time, filing reports and reconciling impossible numbers and waiting, without ever knowing I was waiting, for the right question to be asked at 2 a.m. on the right night, in the right fluorescent-lit gray room, by the right person who didn't send a lawyer and didn't send an assistant. He came himself. I think about that sometimes, when I'm deep in an account audit by the window, with the river going silver in the afternoon light, and I hear the knock on the doorframe that means he has a problem that needs a specific kind of solving. He came himself, and that, as it turned out, was the beginning of everything.